The World Bank has issued a cautious note to Nigeria, urging Africa's largest economy to prioritize taming inflation and stabilizing the foreign exchange market before celebrating recent economic reforms. Nigerian President Bola Tinubu has embarked on the country's biggest reforms in decades, unifying the country's multiple exchange rates and scrapping a popular but expensive petrol subsidy, which the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund had for years called on Nigeria to do. The impact has been a record inflation, which has risen for 10 straight months, reaching 27.33% in October, the highest in almost 2 decades. And while acknowledging the potential long-term benefits of the currency reforms and petrol subsidy removal, the bank's message underscored the need for immediate action to address 2 major stumbling blocks to sustain growth in the country. This morning, Gospel Obele, Chief Economist, Streetnomics, joins me to talk more about this. Gospel, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
Now, when you look at Nigeria's inflation currently, it's about 27.33%, and that means that goods and services are rising rapidly. Of course, we know that several other countries are also going through the same situation. But then for Nigeria, what are the peculiarities?
I mean, it's a global issue. Inflation is a global issue, and based off on different national peculiarities, we can see it reflected in the overall state of goods and services. But globally, right, prices are rising. In some economies, or largely as well globally, there's an evolving narrative of what we term as a cost of living crisis, meaning inflation has eaten so deep into the core daily survival elements like food, fuel, energy, and the likes of the average individual that they have to spend more of their income day after day to even survive. All right. So for the Nigerian context, you already have a nation that is so broken fundamentally. There are a lot of structural deficits and structural challenges prior to when the whole Russian-Ukraine war and the recent inflationary dynamics took effect. So we already had that. All right. So what it means is that the level of impact will be much more severe. So it's a global issue, but the level at which countries were ready to take it on at the time reflected in the pace at which inflation, skyrocketed. And in the Nigerian case, it's not anything different in context. It was just that we've always had a structural issue. We've always had a strongly consumption-driven, not productive economy in any way. We've always, depended largely on imports to survive nationally. So you have a situation where, all of these deep-seated, structural deficits and misalignments, gave room for, a lot more deeper impact of the inflationary crisis that's happening globally.
We know that controlling inflation requires measures like tightening monetary policy and addressing supply chain bottlenecks. Now, what's your assessment of the MPC decisions in terms of tightening the policy, looking at the inflation level that has skyrocketed in this particular year?
Well, globally, there's been a tightening. Globally, there's been a tightening, interest rate tightening, and all different type of policies aimed at so-called curbing inflation. So it's not necessarily been an MPC challenge, but the MPC has also followed suit, as many other central banks in Africa have done. However, I still retain my stance that I do not think tightening is the way forward, because the context, the structure, the composition of the inflation we're dealing with right now is not a monetary situation. It's more structural. It's more geopolitical. We have more non-economic elements eating deep into our economic realities or informing our socioeconomic realities, as it were now. So we need to move past just interest rates, which is enough, which is safe enough as a necessary condition. But in moving to looking for something much more sufficient within a time to live in, it has to be interest rate and something else, So I do not think that the raising of interest rates are very sustainable. And we've seen how that has circled back deeply into not just the inflationary dynamics anymore, but the cost of living impact.
So looking at the way the measures that the government has put in place has impacted Nigerians, its economy, and every other areas, we see that the World Bank is telling Nigeria to control inflation and try as much as possible to stabilize its foreign exchange market. And of course, the government has done quite a number of things in that line, but then we've not really seen some sort of change in what is expected so far. Now, the World Bank is saying that the Nigerian government should carry out several complementary reforms that are needed. So when you talk about complementary reforms, what is the World Bank talking about, aside from what the Nigerian government had done before?
Well, it's a whole lot of interesting pack that has to go in, and it has nothing to even do with inflation. The Nigerian prosperity agenda, our development agenda, is largely hinged on these reforms. All right. So first and foremost, they must happen. It's a must. It has to happen because right now things have really gone so bad that if you do not reform at the level of complementary dynamics, complementary meaning that one reform is so interdependently linked to another reform happening. So it's not a combination of start one, finish one, then start another. It has to be a situation where you have multiple intelligent reforms being woven together, executed almost at the same time, and all of that. So there are a lot of reforms. You have education reforms, you have healthcare reforms, you have pricing reforms, you have market reforms. There are many interdependencies that needs to happen to get Nigeria, in a place of productivity and relief. But it's safe to say as well that this reform issue is a global issue. So let's not make it look as the World Bank is hitting heavily on Nigeria. No, it's a global issue. Globally, reforms need to happen. But because of the dire state that we're in, even prior to when this crisis hit, we even need more reforms than any other, and all that. So, yeah, so those are the kind of reforms we need to think of having. Reforms that hinge heavily on supporting prosperity, and dealing with all the complex web of structural bottlenecks. You don't think of infrastructure bottlenecks, farm to market, and all these things. So you have to be a complete web of interdependent reforms, to facilitate the prosperity move that Nigeria needs to see, to ensure that its citizens are protected from subsequent shocks in the future.
All right. Earlier on, you talked about the fact that interest rate hikes, it's not actually the only thing that can be done to control inflation. Now, Nigeria Central Bank has been advised to also look at building market confidence, freeing forex exchange pricing, and phasing out ways and means advances to government, and also discontinuing its development finance initiatives. How feasible are these areas? How doable are them? And how would they help?
Which particular areas, please?
Yes, earlier on I talked about building market confidence, freeing forex pricing, phasing out ways and means, and of course, developing the finance initiatives. So looking at these critical 4 areas, is it feasible? Is it something that Apex Bank can do? And how would it help?
I don't think the Apex Bank can, solve all the problems that Nigeria currently has right now. We need to find really innovative solutions to financing our development challenges. But first of all of the non-financing elements have to be in place. The right culture, the right ideology, the right political will, the right values that drive for the establishment of those critical or heavyweight items that would facilitate growth and development. So you need to have all those things, because if you don't have all those things and the financing comes, it will just be another story from that day. The normal story that happens that lots of financing on the table, yet nothing is being done about the challenge. So we need to fix the core that makes for the average Nigerian's life become better over the years. All right. So facilitating all of those web of enablers has to happen. Then number 2 will now be the financing bit. I mean, there are very, very interesting and innovative ways to raise financing. If you think of, there are a lot of billionaires in Nigeria. There's a lot of domestic resource available in Nigeria that the bank, the central bank, the government has to creatively tap into, create tax incentives, create avenues or opportunities for private sector stakeholders to contribute towards the developmental cause of the nation. There's also the foreign diaspora remittances that's constantly on the rise, but unfortunately has been tilted more towards welfareism so far, right? But people will not commit to a cause that they know that the institutions driving this cause are not ready to do the right things. All right. If not the right is at least ready to do the win-win things, safe to say, because the word right is a bit complex in the world we live in today, in the actual sense of policy to prosperity. All right. So policy, prosperity, and politics. All right. So we need to now begin to think of how do we tap into domestic funding? How do we elevate the message, the Nigerian dream, and all of these things? These things are very critical. until you can give people, investors, and institutions something to hold on, they would not commit to that. There is no vision right now for the Nigerian people. So the ways and means and all of these investment that has to go into development, these monies are firmly seated in the hands of people, hands of private sector institutions in Nigeria. We just need to rethink ways, the ways in which we're engaging, and the enablers that would help us facilitate the right financing.
Yes, now talking about
mainstream.
Of course, now talking about enablers, now let's look at the social safety nets and what is expected in that regard. Now, it's been said that about 104 million Nigerians have actually hit or are below the poverty line, and that's according to World Bank. Now, of course, we know that the Nigerian government has handed out cash in some instances to vulnerable citizens in the country. Are you convinced that that, in a way, even as we hope that a positive transformation will come to the Nigerian economy, are you convinced that these particular initiative will help cushion or mitigate the effect of the pangs the Nigerians are going through right now?
Well, they are necessary because reliefs are very key in the times we live in. You can't take off reliefs. Everywhere in the world is, even the UK is running a cost of living fund plus support for charities and all that to help local people, get out of the crisis, the cost of living crisis. So relief is part of the intervention. You cannot take it out. However, it is not in any way sufficient. So we need to, as much as we think of relief, we need to pull the heavyweights. The heavyweights are these complementary reforms that the World Bank is talking about. We're fixing the right enablers that include, in fact, for me, I would think of human capital first off. And when you think of human capital, you think of two things: education and health. If you fix those two things plus an enabling business environment, you realize that if the quality of the average Nigerian will rise, the quality of the Naira will increase, opportunities will rise, and all of those things. So it's very critical that you have interventions going on one, no matter how basic those interventions are. But at a more structural level, at the more sufficient level, actually, you now need a structural reforms to drive the sustainable elements that would help a critical mass break out into prosperity. And that's where Nigeria needs to get to. However, the conversation has been so basic on palliatives and all of those things. Now, those things are very important. Those things are still very myopic in context to where Nigeria needs to get. I mean, it's just so amazing how those are the elements or line items that institutions or different stakeholders, come out to talk about that we are introducing 5 billion palliative for X, Y, Z. I mean, those things are so myopic and small, right? Nigeria needs that, but much more importantly, where the priority, effort, and energy should be. Those other things are like breath. You need to breathe. You don't think about it when you breathe. You don't come to announce it on Instagram. You don't put it on your national budget when you need to breathe. Those, it's part of life. I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say. For nation building, supporting crisis management, facilitating that. But the mainstay is actually, what are you doing about education? What are you doing about health? What are you doing about infrastructure? What are your long-term plans? How are you funding it? Who are the stakeholders that are responsible? How is government evolving to different dynamics of accountability for these streams? When are the projects going to be ready? And all of these things. So these things are extremely important right now because Nigeria is on the verge of so many things that are not supposed to be happening at the moment.
Well, actually tells us that there's a whole lot that the Nigerian government needs to do and take into cognizance if we are hoping to have any sort of change and growth in our economy. Well, we hope that they'll be able to take a cue from all this. Gospel Obele, Chief Economist,
thank you so much.
Streetnomics, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Bye.